to our results. So looks like we have quite a few folks on here. I'm going to look and just check in the chat and make sure that there's no one else on here. And then if not, I think we'll get ready and get started. Looks like Julie needs promoted, Melissa. I don't know if I can promote. Oh, I can promote Julie to panelist. John, it's
Sorry,
good to
Blake.
see you too. Oh, you're okay,
I just
Melissa.
made you a host, and I do need to log off, but I did start the recording, so I just wanted to let everyone know.
Perfect, no problem.
Have a good meeting, everyone.
Yeah, thanks for setting this up, Melissa.
Thank you.
My pleasure. And yes, let's hope for the best for tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, okay, y'all. Julie, it looks like you're on here. Great, good to see you. So for this evening, since it is, a pretty big night, I was thinking that we aim to be at about an hour at 6:30. That way, if anyone is getting off work or needs to go to the polls, that you have time until polls close. And we've got just a couple items to discuss on our agenda for this evening. And we have a guest who's going to be on here that I'll introduce after we do our general announcements and some of our conversation around Memorial Day planning. But if anyone else has anything that they'd like to add to the agenda, I've got Memorial Day event, the Hostel Design Studio, and then updates from the mayor's quarterly check-in with the mayor and city manager.
I can give a brief update of league if you want.
Perfect. Yep, I've got you scheduled right in there. That's how we like to kick off our meetings, is hear what y'all are up to. So after I take a call for agenda items, I'll give the floor to you, Richard.
Okay.
Thomas, anything you want to add? Agenda-wise? Does that sound good to you?
No, I like what you put together.
Okay, cool. Jackie, anything that you'd like to add, or does that feel good?
No additions from me.
Cool. All right. Well, we'll kick it off. So welcome to our November. Is it November? That's crazy. Homelessness and Poverty Work
a
Group.
new month. Yeah.
I know, October. Maybe that's what
October.
happened. Is the months have blended in my mind. Something about direct service work. But yeah, welcome. So I'll just give a brief update and then we'll hand the floor over to Richard to do league updates. We are planning on doing a couple events. And as you know, the Human Rights Commission has been in the work planning phase. So every 2 years, we have to collect work plan items, get them reviewed by the city manager and mayor. And after the city manager gives the approval on what the commission has put forward, it's sent to city council for review. So this year we did planning at our work planning retreat. We had a feedback session during HRC meeting. And then Thomas and I spoke to the mayor and city manager a little bit about some of our aspirations. And got some feedback from the city of Eugene on a couple agenda items that needed some adjustment. So I work with our Central Services Executive Director to get those updated. So I'll let you know what those two items were. They were items that our work group put forward last month. But I'll do that in my mayor and quarterly meeting updates section. But tonight, I think our three primary goals is just going to be doing that update, introducing you to SOLMAs, and then diving into our planning for the Memorial Day event, which is approaching. So, Richard, let's kick off with the Lived Experience Advocacy Work Group updates. If you have anything that you'd like to share with the group, let us know what you all have been up to, any key priorities that you've identified.
That's the Lived Experience Advisory Group for Unhoused Engagement. And we are looking into what's going on once again with the vacant buildings and structures within the city and county, and if they are taxable because they are in that process, are they able to be taken by eminent domain by the city or county because they have remained vacant. Sure, everybody has seen one of these where it's just either a house or a former business that is just sitting there vacant and so forth. So we're trying to get to the bottom of this. I can advise that Commissioner, Lane County Commissioner Pat Farr, some time ago, if I'm right, I will inquire when he visits League, but from my understanding, he did look into this and found a lot of the buildings were not only out of state owned, but out of country owned. The 13th and Olive student housing building near me is owned by Japan, a real estate company in Japan, to give you an example. So tracking down some of these buildings or vacant properties are, part of a big real estate conglomerate's portfolio. It's some agent that has that property, and they're making more by getting taxed on it or leaving it vacant than doing anything about it. It just is a tax write-off to them. So that's one thing we're doing. And then we were also advised of this. And hold on, I will just read this to you here. The state of Oregon is going to roll out new housing benefits for eligible OHP members with health conditions. They are working with specific health conditions that may help qualify first in the nation benefits to keep current housing and other housing services. These benefits include rent assistance for up to 6 months, utility setup payments for 6 months, home modifications and upgrades for safety reasons, ramp installation, pest control, rental navigation services. And unlike other state and local prevention services, eligible members can request these benefits ahead of receiving an eviction notice. Not all OHP members will qualify. To qualify, you have to be at least have one of the following health conditions: a complex physical or behavioral health condition, a developmental or intellectual disability, difficulty with self-care and daily activities, the experience of abuse or neglect, being 65 years of age or older, but there is wiggle room in there, I understand, being under the age of 6, currently pregnant or gave birth in the past 12 months, or repeated use of emergency room or crisis care. And that's just some of this. This is Trillium and Peace Out, our Pacific Source, getting together and heading this out. We were advised this has not been rolled out for Lane County yet. It will be, but I don't know if it's a matter of budgetary reasons or why a reason wasn't given. But that will be available soon for this area. And that is my league update.
Jackie is here.
Thank you for giving us those updates, Richard. And I know for Lane County, I believe that there are providers that are currently in the process of applying with Trillium and Pacific Source to become providers. And so I think that's where they're at in the process, and that's why it hasn't been rolled out. But I know that some providers have received information about it as well.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, I echo that sentiment. There's a lot of providers that have been exploring the CCO space. So knowing how to navigate both of those, as well as thinking about capacity building partnerships. So helping folks that are navigating, who are in OHP or Trillium. We've been talking a lot about those health-related needs, navigation resources, and pairing that with some of the diversion flexible funds that are available. So it's really good to hear that League's talking about this. I think one of the things that I've seen quite a bit recently, Richard, is the county putting out a lot of affinity specific RFPs, which I think is allowing providers to think about specific demographics that they'd like to help increase access to coordinated entry and different types of PSH or RH projects. So it's yeah, I think that I'm seeing some of those wheels churn that you're talking about too, in like the development space that I'm in. So it's just good to hear that League is looking at those, and I think that your all's effort in identifying and partnering with the county has been really helpful, at least in my experience of trying to do development work in this space. So yeah.
Well, rolling this out, it doesn't really help people get housing, which is
Yeah.
very, and if it was, what housing? So
Mhm.
catch 22, a repeated cycle there until we do get more
Yeah.
affordable, income-based affordable housing. But in the meantime, I used to advise when I was unhoused. My provider at the time, which was Trillium, I had a personal care advisor because of my situation. So he would
Mhm.
call me at least once a month, if not more often. And I would tell him, he was really nice, but I'd tell him, this can't be cost effective for you to have me out here as a
Mhm.
patient. It's just not cost effective, no
Yeah.
matter how healthy I am. I become more unhealthy by the moment, and it costs you to have me go to the emergency room instead of being in a house with a provider doctor, blah blah blah.
Mhm.
It's not cost effective for having, and I don't know how many people are on OHP or how many people have Trillium or Pacific Source, but it's not cost effective for any of those agencies or businesses. Doesn't help their bottom line to have homeless people as their patients. It just that inflates the bottom line, and makes more in the red, I think you call it, than would be necessary. It makes it bleed.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. And I think as you all are exploring some of the recommendations in that space, and you know, some of the things that like kind of crossed my mind is, there are a lot of agencies that participate in the coordinated entry system, which allows us to kind of see where folks are landing between different organizations or what types of services that they might be accessing. But I think one of the biggest challenges that I'm seeing right now is there are certain demographics, I think, particularly like folks with like moderate medical needs, or sometimes some more intensive like medical incidents are occurring, and there's some limitations to like medical respite programs, and referrals for street outreach providers. So I think like as you kind of explore how might we utilize certain environments or like properties that the county where the county has those assets, whether it's through eminent domain or various financial mechanisms. I'd love to see some thought and investment in the space of like moderate medical needs, folks that don't quite qualify for medical recuperation programs, but individuals that say maybe have like specific statuses or ongoing disabilities that might be unsheltered, making it really difficult for consistent care offering by street outreach providers like Black Thistle, or HIV Alliance. Some of our folks, Occupy Medical, like those folks that are walking the tracks or that are like going through neighborhoods. I've seen that just to be a really it's really hard to get the consistent care piece. So if you are making any recommendations with Pat around like land use, I think like the Sandlot on I think it's called Sandlot out on 99 has been a really good asset to like carry it forward, and Hope on Wheels. And I think little multi-use properties like that if they were made available to providers to own or rent, at a very small lease. I think it could be a really big asset to like the shelter and outreach ecosystem. So as you're having kind of those land use discussions, I would love for you to talk about how are we opening up some of these properties to be utilized by providers, especially if they have facilities, that wouldn't be exorbitant to run. So that's just a little in your brain from mine to yours. If you hear conversations about properties, that's something that's in my mind a lot.
We have a whole hospital sitting there on 12th or 13th and Hilliard that's empty.
If you can get me that, let me know.
But the whole damn thing is empty. I mean,
Yeah.
we could reutilize that right now until later and help a whole bunch of people. I mean, especially coming this winter. I don't understand, why does common sense be lost in the red tape? I don't know.
Mhm. If you figure that one out, let me know. Cool. Okay, y'all. Any other questions for Richard or League as we go through? I really appreciate the updates, Richard. It's always really valuable conversation to open up this meeting.
Anything you think the city can do to help in this regard would be great. It was a city and county combined effort that made the camp run by Eric Jackson on Highway 99 happen. And of course, that became a mess in the end, but that wasn't Eric's fault. That was just how things fell apart.
Yeah. I'll highlight some of the points from our quarterly meeting that kind of echo some of the potential land use decisions that we discussed with the mayor and city manager. And maybe that'll stoke some of those wheels. Okay, so our next piece on here, I have 15 minutes for Solmaz to introduce herself, talk a little bit about what she's interested in doing. So I'll just give a brief introduction. So Solmaz is a professor at the University of Oregon who has been working on various studio projects in collaboration with social service providers. And I invited her to this meeting this evening to meet us, talk a little bit about a studio project that she's interested in exploring next year, and thinking about ways that our working group or various groups that we work with could provide insight to students on hostile design and some land use decisions being made. And so Solmaz, if you want to talk a little bit about who you are, the studio that you are conducting, and we can brainstorm a little bit how we might engage. And I'm thinking about until 6:05.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Blake, and thanks everyone for your time. Just a quick correction. This is not a studio. This is a seminar class, much less involved in terms of the time. So with the studios, I've been working with Blake and Tabitha for 2 years, not 2 years. I wish it was 2 years, for 2 terms. So students were working on Conestoga Huts, and then we are this time working a little bit with CSS for the service center. So that's the studio. But this project is a seminar class for the winter course, winter term. So that starts in January. So just let me actually first. I just pasted something on the chat. And this isn't from this class, but just to give you a little bit sense of the type of things that we've done in the previous classes, something different. So the link that I have here are for classes that are general history classes. There was just 1 or 2 courses on the hostile architecture. So the idea of hostile architecture, as I'm sure pretty much everyone here knows, but just to know that that's the term that I'm using, that's the type of architecture that architecture or public furniture that are used or designed in a way to discourage people from using the public space. the very famous example is, of course, the handrests on the benches, but as I'm sure all of you know, we have quite a lot of other examples in Eugene as well. So the idea is that we have different things in class. We have theoretical discussions, historical background, and things of that sort. But I also want to have a good field study for students. So the goal is for students both to understand the city a little better and really engage with the community at a more personal level. So as all of us know, there are a lot of misperceptions. So my goal is that that engagement also helps with people really increasing their understanding and level of understanding when they are designing something. So that's the overall goal that I have in mind with that. So what I was hoping to do was to particularly when I'm thinking about the activities that the students do, that's one of the things that I really wanted to get your kind of brainstorming some ideas and run some of the ideas I have with you. That was one of the things that I wanted to discuss with you. And another one is probably that might be too much for this meeting, but we'll see how that goes. Another one is that when we are analyzing and discussing the examples of hostile architecture in Eugene, what are different frameworks that we can look at them? For example, we can talk about them in terms of the agent who does that. Is it a public or a private agent? We can talk about the ways that the piece of design is working. Is it something that's preventing people? Is it a coercive measure? Is it an explicit or an implicit measure? We can talk about the strategies that they use. Something, for example, do they change the bench? Do they add something to it? Do they completely remove any type of facilities from the public space? Or we can talk about other aspects of it in terms of how that hostility is disguised in a way. So when we are comparing something like spikes, which are more common in some places like London, for example, they are much more explicit. But when we are talking about something like boulders or bike racks, things of that sort, they are not very explicit. A lot of people don't understand some people get alarmed when they see those explicit measures. But when people don't understand don't see those explicit measures, usually you see much less reaction from people who are more concerned about the inclusion in the city. So that's the framework ones. But I think probably the activities is the best place to start with. So what again, I don't want to spend the time on talking about the history and theory and those part of it, that part. I think I know what to do with that part. The part that I really need help with is the type of activities that engage students with the activists and with the community. And Blake and I had a wonderfully helpful conversation on it a few months ago. That was a few months ago. So that was very helpful. So I was hoping to just follow up on that and kind of more develop that one a little better. So one is, and I just quickly list a couple of things that came to my mind, and a good part of it is based on what we talked about earlier, but maybe I just list them and then we just pick some of them and talk about them more. So one is, I think definitely lectures and by advocate groups or by community members, whoever is interested in that topic. So that could be lectures and discussions at the university. But then another one that Blake, you suggested and I thought was amazing was focus groups. So the way I think about it right now is potentially students do some initial studies and then they present it to the focus group and get some feedbacks from the focus group. But I need some help on developing that idea a little better. Another thing is interviews, and I know you had some concerns about interviews with the people who are like students are not experts in interviews, and I totally agree with you. That's not a good idea to have students who are not I mean, without having any wrong intention, but sometimes they may not necessarily conduct a proper interview with everyone. So that might be interview just with the advocates and with groups who are already available for those type of activities. And again, with the focus group, one is in a way students showing their work. Another one is that how, if we can have more than one, what would be the form of that initial one? In a way, discussing and so let's say the first one is more for students to understand the scope of the issue. And that could be more than just hostel design, understanding the scope of homelessness in Eugene and how that actually affects people's life. And then the second one could be the presentation of their finding and getting feedback from people. And then another question I had was, which is very much related to the activities. How do you imagine so if the idea is that we are at the same time doing some practices for students to learn different topics, but hopefully we are also producing something that could be used for advocate groups in, you were suggesting earlier that might be something that League might want to use. So my question was like, how can we, what is the type of thing that is more helpful for you? So the map that I shared here, that's something that we did for, again, as I said, that was a very short and quick activity. I just asked the students after a little, I had a lecture on hostel architecture, and then I asked them to find examples in Eugene and map them and analyze them. But that was it. We didn't really go any deeper than that. So part of the reason I shared it with you was if you have different, if let's say, for example, adding different layers to this one, layers based on the agents or layers based on the type of hostel design, or different things of that sort, if that is something helpful, or no, dividing it in terms of different districts. Basically, the question is that if you see a more developed version of this one being more helpful. And this one is a very simple Google map that's, again, ideally, I'm thinking of it as something that can exist after the class, something that if it ends up to be a Google map, that's something very easily everyone can add to that. If we want to have more layers, then I need to use something that some tools that might not be open access, but that's again a question to see basically what are different thoughts on how this can develop. So those are very good. I try to be very fast and quick, so get more conversation and feedbacks from you. You are muted, Blake.
I am, yeah, I have some feedback. I'm really resonating with this work. This matches and mirrors a lot of the education I received at the University of Oregon as a sociology major and graduate with like a legal studies minor, ethnic studies, Native American studies minor. And when I'm looking at Eugene as a community with hostel architecture, the one thing I notice has to do with transportation, because years ago, there used to be covered bus stops in the Four Corners neighborhood where a lot of our unhoused population is right now.
Mhm.
And over time, those were taken away and removed. So now we no longer have a place to sit if someone is at the bus stop in Four Corners. There's also, yes, right. And if you go to the University of Oregon, I see covered bus stops, and so I do see this, being perpetuated in our community, and it becomes quite normalized. But the communities that are impacted have more like migrant families, more unhoused folks, so this absolutely does resonate with things I've seen occur around here over the last several decades.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, thanks. Exactly. Bus stop is one of the great examples for it. Some of them completely remove it. Some of them have those intentionally design it in a way that you have split seats, so you can't really use it for a sleeping or anything that they don't consider as a proper, quote unquote, proper use. But definitely bus stop, a very helpful example.
Yes, thank you. One of the things you can bring into this conversation, as we have tried to do with the criminalization of homelessness overall, is the cost of doing the hostile architecture. it costs a lot of money to dump a bunch of rocks where people were sleeping the night before.
Absolutely.
It costs a lot of money to make a bench that used to be able to be slept on with one more armrest or what have you right in the middle of it so it can't be slept on anymore. It costs a lot of money to do that. And as she just pointed out, it costs a lot of money to remove the bus bench and the covering and throw that in the trash. It just costs a lot more. So the cost of these things for the taxpayers ought to be brought into the conversation. I yield.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Yeah, that's a very, very great example. And so I'm thinking about it out loud. So it could be very well an exercise for students to pick, let's say, a group of 2-3 students to pick one of these examples and just really go and estimate the cost that it causes. And I know I had earlier some of my students, they found the statistics for the boulders. I don't have the number off the top of my head, but that was a ridiculous amount of money used for that. But I think that's a great idea.
So Solmaz, as we're thinking about some engagement with our working group here and some of the folks, we talked about a couple of the different methods that we might be able to glean information. And if I can kind of connect on the what the engagement with the students, might look like, we could think about how we host and provide that feedback in a really effective way. We meet on a monthly basis, but we have the capacity to meet in other genres as long as they're public forums. So there might be some ways that like our working group could organize and provide feedback or participate. Maybe a couple folks would like to participate. Or hosting like a public event. Do you have kind of an idea of what that might look like and what time frame we're looking at?
So the class meets on Tuesday, Thursday from 2 to 3:20. And there is no way I can have a students come to anything other than those hours. It just that's this new generation. So that's pretty much the time frame. So I tried to move it to Tuesday and Thursday because I know you said Tuesday, Thursday afternoon is better than morning. The evening had other issues, so I had to go with this one. And I also forgot to say this. I have not a great amount of money, but a little budget for the if there's any cost related to the focus group, just a little bit compensation for just as an appreciation for the time of people to give us those feedbacks. But in terms of the place, it could be, I can definitely do it in UOVO or ideally, again, you know that, Blake, from the experience, the students are not very easy to take to different places. But when we are talking about something like community engagement, I can have them to present their works once or twice at another place, but not more often. Zoom, definitely. We can do as many Zoom meetings as it's relevant. So that definitely works. But in terms of, I would really like to have at least one in-person meeting, one or ideally 2 in-person meeting. And again, could be at any place. And I was also, initially we were talking about the students creating some posters or some type of, again, could be a digital map, could be a poster. That's really something I hope to hear from you, which one of them, what form of them could be really helpful. But the idea was that they also create something that we can live with you for potential use later.
Great. That's really helpful. I saw a couple of hands come up, and then we can take some ideas, and then Solmaz, after our meeting tonight, we can hash out some details of what would feel comfortable to everyone.
That sounds great.
Wonderful. So I'm not sure who was first, Jolene or Richard, but I'll see both your hands and you two can decide.
Go ahead, Jolene.
Oh, Richard can go. Oh. Oh my gosh. Okay. Yeah. Okay, fine. I'll go first. So I am interested in continued collaboration with students. I do see, the students that are coming out of the University of Oregon as, beacons of hope, especially when it comes to change making and continued work within our community.
Mhm.
And another point that's harder to nail down is when we think about, how our social scapes are formed, like even just with transportation, like who gets to have the ability to maneuver at will and who has to be relegated to bus stops with no coverings and with a limited Sunday bus schedule, for example, where it takes you 4 hours to go to one place. So there's definitely social class struggles that are occurring here and that are shaping our everyday lives and experiences. And for me, the thing that comes to mind is accessibility, like who has access to a place to sleep at night, who has access to transportation, who has access to opportunity, who has the messaging, and that social conditioning where it's like, yes, this is a place for you and you belong. And I'm kind of gleaning a lot of that from your work. Because like we can talk about benches, but this is the social scape that shapes our outcomes, as community members.
No, no, absolutely, absolutely. So we definitely have some readings, and I'm sure you are, with your background, you're familiar with the idea of the right to the city
Yeah,
and kind of the discussions on that. So we definitely have those discussions on kind of larger picture view of why things are this way and how they are normalized, which is equally a problematic issue. But moving on the topic we were talking, can you think about, do you have any suggestions about the type of activities for students to build on those theoretical discussions, ideally something related to Eugene? And I know I'm
I
just
would say,
dropping it on you, but
yeah, no, that's okay. I would say go across town to do a task, to do an appointment by a certain time on Sunday. And then just kind of pay attention to how long that takes, how long you're waiting at the station, because people waiting at the bus station historically have been a problem or viewed as a problem. They used to have classical music that was playing on a loop just to deter people from the
exactly.
downtown area. Yes, I remember those days. So that would
I
be one.
don't,
It's like take a Sunday bus schedule, see how long it takes to do one thing, and then kind of think about that as like if you had to pick up a prescription, all the steps
I
and all
love
the
that.
organization that you'd have to do.
I love that idea. Yeah, I think that's great. Yeah, yeah, thanks.
I've got some activity ideas I could share, and then I want to see Richard's hand as well. One thing that might relate to some of the work of our working group is having students explore the physical constraints of space that people are allowed to reside outside. So the city of Eugene currently um, has not provided a jurisdictional map for where individuals are allowed to reside when they're unsheltered. So we operate largely when we're doing street outreach from this perspective of advising people on where they cannot go, but we don't really have guidance on where individuals can go. So we operate a lot under that kind of style. So if someone comes into, say, an outreach office, or I'm doing street outreach, I'm saying, you can't be in parks and open spaces if you're non-established. Parks and open space, can give you a 2-hour notice. If you have an established, camp under their definition, they say that they'll give you 24-hour notice. If you're in a public way, they have to post and give a 72-hour notice, right? And so we could think about these different geographies that have political and enforcement constraints on them, and look at hostile architecture within those spaces. So, spaces that have a 72-hour notice, maybe it's interesting to see what types of hostile architecture might be in, a public way versus what might be in a park and open space. So is hostile architecture being used as a mechanism for enforcement in different spaces? Like if you go through a park right, and say you're on the river trail, it's really common to see boulders or rocks or things like that under bridges, which would be like really accommodating structures, helping people stay out of the rain. And is there a correlation between the use of those hostile architecture elements and those enforcement constraints that are on, you know, the land? And that might be a really compelling activity to be thinking through those frameworks of how are camping laws being enforced? And, you know, then I think part of like what our work group could, you know, really provide perspective on, and League could really provide perspective on, is how those enforcement practices relate, you know, relate to like people's experience of the institutions, and how maybe some of those narratives, um, you know, might be challenged. Like folks are saying, hey, that's what that policy is, but that's not really what happens. Or in these certain areas, this is where it's different. Or, you know, so those types of interactions with enforcement practices, thinking about the physical space and how that might be being used, I think would be a really compelling and kind of thought provoking for students who may not have the exposure to what life is actually like when you're trying to find a place to live.
I agree. I agree. That's a great idea. So both exposure to the lived experience, but also connecting the city policies to the form of the design. I think that's a great idea. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm gonna look back on and try to send you some policy recommendations, but I'm gonna give you it was House Bill 3115, in which they expanded Eugene code. It was 4.816 and 4.815, which were there are prohibited camping ordinances, and they were expanded with House Bill 3115. We had a lot of discussions in our working group about what that expansion and like how that impacted people's interactions. For example, sleeping in spaces that are deemed a waterway, so like your proximity to a creek or a river, and then people's ability to reside near public or educational institutions like the library or schools. So those are big design elements that I think, looking at what types of things are connected to those different aspects of the city landscape, would be, I think, really compelling and something that we could organize experience around.
No, I agree. I agree. This is a great idea. It works from different aspects. So it works in terms of relating the like furniture. If you think of something like boulders or benches as furniture, and then relating that to the architecture, library, schools, things like that, and then the level of policy. I think that's a great idea.
So, Richard, I see your hand. I want to make sure you have some time.
Yes, first of all, why is the great and honorable and competent Julie Lambert sitting out there as an attendee?
She's on our panel. I'm not sure why she is. Why? I think that she's able to unmute. I'm not sure.
Okay.
She's on here.
Okay. Second of all, 3115 is going to be looked at after this election by the legislature to see if it can be more compliant with the Supreme Court ruling and grants pass. So if your stomach doesn't turn at that, then you're not alive. Okay. Second of all, I'm going to throw some stuff at you, Professor, but here we go. How many students at the university are homeless?
Not a large number, but there are a few people, yes.
That's something you might want to start with. Also, there was a report that was drawn up by students at the university not too long ago, within the last 3 years, about the health of the homeless, and they found, much to my surprise, sarcasm included there, that being homeless is not healthy. Something you might surprise, surprise. Also, I'm sure included in whatever Blake would like to send you, he should also let you access or send you The report done by a former law student of the and actually a lawyer for the law center, Lori Haber, that did a report in 2019 on the criminalization of homelessness and its costs, its effects, its absolute nonsense of doing things the way we have done since the time of the hobo. Okay, and so we are not getting anywhere in the unhoused situation except for exacerbating it by doing things the way they have. And things are only going to get worse if we continue this way. I yield.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's a very, very great point. So can I ask you one question on that? And I know, like, if you if you have any ideas about it, I think this is definitely the idea of criminalization of homelessness. That's absolutely on top of my list. And part of the reason that I really want to have engagement between the students and community members is that it's one thing if we talk about it in theory, it's another thing that they interact with the community members. Like last term in my studio, when people worked with the clients, that was really, really helpful to actually see how thoughtful, how creative the clients are. So that is definitely something extremely important for me to do. But the question I wanted to kind of push it one step further. What type of activities do you think can help with be getting more tangible with that, having more kind of experience related to the, in a way, challenging that criminalization or seeing the effect of that criminalization in person?
What kind of activities? You can go from
Yes.
anywhere. You can go from, and you can join in this too. You can go from anywhere from locking yourself out of the house for an hour when it's raining and no jacket, no umbrella, just your shirt, your pants, and what have you, and stand out in the rain for an hour.
No, I didn't mean to say what activity, how that affects the students. Sorry, how that affects homeless people. My question was if you can think of, if you have any ideas, and again, this is kind of brainstorming, if you have any ideas on how what students should do, like what exercise should I give to students to think more about the problem of criminalization?
And I saw Julie and Jolene's hands go up, so they might have ideas too.
I'll let them jump in, and I'll think about your question there, Professor. Just a
Perfect.
moment.
Thank you so much.
Jolene, I think your hand popped up, and then Julie's.
I hope you can hear me. Oh,
Yes, we can.
oh, okay. Yeah, there it is. Okay. Yeah, well, I mean, there is definitely a pipeline between unhoused folks and our mass incarceration, that has been going on for the last and growing since the last several decades. One thing that does kind of catch my eye, especially around unhoused folks and how this is not just an us them issue, but something that does impact students as well, is that according to NPR, over 1.5 million college students in the US are unhoused. And this does have an impact on academic achievement, mental health, physical health. As we all know, there is a certain trauma that happens when you lose your housing, your stability, and your shelter. And that growth from that point, that healing journey is definitely not linear. You might become housed, lapse into houselessness again, become housed again, lapse into houselessness again. And I think the fallacy is that systems and people expect a linear growth and they expect it to happen soon. But as far as the University of Oregon, I don't have those numbers, but I do know that students on campus experience housing insecurity and food insecurity as well. One activity, and it's not related to the criminalization, but one activity that students could do is something that we've discussed on this work group prior, which is if police are moving 200 unhoused people from a campsite and they go to the Lane County, Oregon shelter finder, as a good faith effort to link unhoused people to shelter, it would be a good exercise for students to see in real time just how few beds are available in shelters, and then also explore the different ways to access those shelters, because they're not just open 24 hours a day. Some people say get on a waiting list. Some people say show up at a certain time frame. So there's a certain amount of agency someone has to be able to connect to that shelter, which is why we have a lot of street outreach people who are working out in teams to try and get people connected. But that would be one way to see structurally the architecture and the systems that we're dealing with, which is not a physical bench, but the systems that we're working with every day to try and connect people to the appropriate resource, and just how hard that is. And I yield.
Yeah, no, that's a great idea. Definitely. I like it. Yeah. I'll try to fit that one in another exercise as well. Yeah, great. Thank you.
And Julie, I saw your hand.
Thanks, Blake. Thanks for your presentation tonight. This is really interesting. I wanted to ask you, the planting strips that they put down to dissuade people from laying down, they look nice, but would you consider that hostile architecture because it was done with that intent?
Wonderful question. Yes, actually, one of the frameworks that I use is how hostile architecture is disguised. And to me, that's one of the example of it. It looks like it is beneficial, it is beautiful, but the real intent is not really that beauty. It's just to make it look less hostile, to make it just basically for people who don't think about, for majority of house people who don't think about it that way, they just won't notice it and they appreciate that beauty. Other examples in Seattle, I know they added a bike path. Again, another they removed one of the parking lots, one of the parkings that was used as a camping site with unhoused people. They removed it and they turned it in a biking path. A lot of examples of that sort they do. Yeah, I definitely I include that. But other than, if you have any ideas, again, to me, the way I'm looking at that is that idea of the level of disguise, that's one of the frameworks that I want the students to analyze the examples based on that. But if you have other ideas on that one, that would be great as well.
Yeah, and the activity that I recommend a lot of people to do, but most people I don't think are capable of doing it, is to disconnect for 24 hours. Take your cell phone and leave it home, leave your keys at home, pretend you have no friends. There's nobody you can call, and then walk around the city and try to figure out, what did you do? You can't associate with your friends or anything like that. You cut yourself off completely and just put yourself in the middle of the city and try to figure out what are you going to do, where you're going to be and be safe. Thank you. Thanks for coming.
Thank you so much. That's actually also a great idea. I'm thinking of it in related to Julian's idea of taking the bus, and maybe taking the bus and you don't have your phone with you. Though I should be a little bit careful about the students getting lost and then sue university for that. But no, I think that's a great idea too.
So Richard, I see your hand, and then probably after that we'll wrap up so that we can go into our Memorial Day planning, and we'll make some plans to follow up with Soma. So Richard.
Okay, a couple of things is if any student or into this wants to, they can for a moment or for as long as they can do it, pretend that they just became homeless and find out how much fun that is to navigate the system, find out where to go eat, find out where to sleep that night, to find out all of these things. That's one thing. And then one thing else that I've been thinking about for a long time, and that's getting from a self-centered community to a more of a community spirit. How can I say this better? More getting rid of self-interest and getting to community interest. How can we do that? We need to get this away from just what's in it for me. How come I don't get a free house? how come I don't get free stuff, to community-centered interest where the people are encouraging other people that are less fortunate to get what they need. This is something I don't even know that the students could tackle or yourself, but how can we change this from a self-interested community to a community-interested community? I yield.
Mhm. No, thanks. That is, of course, I think is an extremely important topic. So the way I think about it right now, I have some discussions on the idea of the public. So a lot of times when they are, like when I'm looking at the texts, when they are justifying hostile design, they are justifying it in the name of the public. But then one of the criticism is that then what is that public that we are creating? A very aggressive public in a way, or as you were saying, an image of the public that only cares about themselves, not about anything other than that. So my point is that at a larger picture, hostile design is not, of course, the very immediate, extremely aggressive effect of it is on housed people, but it's really affecting everyone by the way that it's defining the nature of public and public space as well. So public spaces become just very basic amenities for people, just some beautiful parks, not really a place for that type of community and interaction that it is, in theory, it is supposed to be. So definitely, yeah, I absolutely agree with you. If we can do anything, actually do anything about it, I wish we could, but I think the minimum is that at least definitely I have it as part of the conversation with the students to really look at it from that other perspective as well. Again, if you come up with any activities that can force students, push students to think more about it, that also would be great.
Well, if we don't fix it and we don't turn it around, it's not just one side that can be hostile. There are many that are unhoused now that are armed. There are many that have no other human contact but law enforcement. But you do that to somebody for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, and they'll snap.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll give you two quick examples, and then I'm going to let Blake take it over. Some woman that was homeless pushed a young boy in front of the streetcar that was coming in New York, the subway, and pushed him near the third rail. Somebody jumped over the rail and grabbed him, and all he ended up with a headache. But now some homeless woman who's out of her mind and has snapped is going to prison for something that she could have made healed of had somebody paid attention. Another man, a couple of years ago in Los Angeles, was walking past a mother and a daughter and suddenly pulled out a pair of shears, garden shears, huge garden shears, and stabbed the young daughter right in the chest. Last I heard, she was in intensive care. Haven't heard a follow-up. I'm assuming she died. People are going to snap if nobody is out there looking out for them. And people are going to be just as hostile to those who are being hostile to them. I yield.
No, thanks. I think and I kind of see that in relation to what you were talking about earlier in terms of community. Because if you don't feel you belong to that community, if the community doesn't treat you in a way that you feel you belong to that community, then yeah, you definitely act in a different way compared to the time that you were accepted and appreciated by the community. I think that's a great point. Yeah, thank you so much.
So, and just looking at our time, I think, Solmaz, it sounds like we have a lot of interest from our working group. And we were able to kind of identify some core themes and this idea of activities that might be beneficial for students, and thinking of some positive engagement that we could create, opportunities for students to engage with members of this working group or folks more broadly. We can put together some ideas and some dates and see if we can invite folks either to some form of in-person discussion or into, some form of activity that might be beneficial to students. And we'll plan out some of those dates and then communicate more broadly with members of the Homelessness and Poverty Work Group that express interest this evening. On this working group, as we're kind of in this planning phase for this, who in here would be interested in continued engagement in this dialogue with Solmaz? And you can just give me a raise of hands and I'll keep a mental list. And then I'll make sure that you're included on, email threads and things associated with it. I've got Julie, Jolene, Richard, I saw you unmuted.
Yeah.
Okay. So if anyone else has interest and you weren't able to raise your hand, just reach out to me. And then Solmaz, you and I can do some follow-up conversations, think about some ways we might engage folks from this working group to support your conversations with students and kind of steer the direction of the projects and deliverables that they'd like to have.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much again, everyone. Very, very helpful ideas, and really helpful, and thanks for agreeing to continue that. So if any ideas come to your mind, please, yeah, just throw them at me. They will be definitely helpful.
Great.
And I don't know, do you want me, I think probably you want me to leave you guys to do your planning work?
You're welcome to stay. We're going to be planning for a memorial event that we put on in December. You're welcome to stay if you'd like, but we're just going to be discussing that next.
Yeah, thanks. I'll follow up with you later. Thanks again. I really appreciate the discussion.
Thank you, Professor.
Thanks for being here. Appreciate you.
Thanks.
So, okay, y'all. And Julie, I see your hand. Is that you were just expressing interest in the studio project or seminar project?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Is it still up right now?
It is. I'll get it for you. All right, I got it lowered.
Okay, but so if I'm not used to these controls. I'm gonna mute myself.
That's okay. Zoom world. Yeah, technology's fun. So, okay. Well, thank y'all. I hope that was a engaging conversation. I look forward to seeing ways that we can support their work and hopefully get some recommendations that we could use more largely. We haven't really produced any planning-based recommendations from this work group. We advise a lot on policy and organizational matters, but some of those environments that work, that are really important for us to be making recommendations really is in the planning department. And us talking about, are we making planning decisions? Are we using urban infrastructure in a way that is negatively impacting members of the unhoused populations, especially in some jurisdictions where we know folks are residing. So I'm hoping that it's kind of a compelling conversation that turns our wheels on how we might make recommendations in the planning space. And students might be able to identify themes in planning practices that we would want to communicate as falling into this definition of harmful or hostile. So thanks for the engaging dialogue, and I hope we can do something really meaningful with their work. So our next piece on the agenda here, and we're pretty on time. We said we'd start at 6:30, and we'll end tonight at 7, so we got that hour for the ballot. Is talking about our Memorial Day event. And we're, at this stage where we just need to, agree on some of our planning pieces, make sure that we have a clear goal, and then I can put in some budgetary requests to the commission so that we can prep for our event in December. So everyone in here has been to our Memorial Day event. So I don't need to go into any major context in the planning or what that event is. So I can just kind of kick off with the, I think the date's December 21st, and it's November 5th. So we've got some time, but we need to apply for permits and get a request into the HRC, which I have no problem putting that forth for our next meeting. Do we want to follow the similar format that we did last year, where we had a 1 hour resource fair, some music, light food, and refreshment? And then the second hour was the programming with the speakers and reading of names. Jolene and Richard, I see both your hands.
Go, Jolene.
Oh, you're muted, Jolene.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I was curious about the location only because, it is by the courthouse. We've discussed, hostile architecture. I don't know if we have a large turnout of people who are unhoused who are able to access the resources, or if there's any way to kind of gauge that, or if there was any further conversations around changing the time and location to a place that's more accessible, or if there were concerns around that, for people who are unhoused, who are losing people.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And Richard?
Well, on that, there was a separate group that met over at Monroe Park last year.
Mm-hmm.
We might want to try and see if we can combine forces and get them over there. But another suggestion would be they have been hands-on, so they're going to know better than anybody else, is inviting the Barefoot Defenders. They would know who is passed on better than anybody else. I yield.
Yeah. So the piece on location, that conversation has come up a couple times. I think we're, as we apply for permits, it's just we just have to pick our park and open space that we can use. So Monroe Park was where there was another event last year, and that's pretty close to downtown. I know that the downtown corridor was selected just so that it's accessible from a variety of geographies. And so that was kind of where that decision was made. I'm not, hey, we have to do it here or there. We've got a pretty good template for the downtown programming. Like we know how everything is kind of laid out there, and the chairs, like chairs and tables and all those things, are hosted in the big storage containers. So I'm not sure what that looks like at other locations, but I would say those are probably questions that we would want to ask before we propose changing the location. But I'm not opposed to that concept. I just want to make sure. Really, I think the biggest piece is accessible circulation and seating. I think is the biggest two pieces. And to the piece with the folks that put on the event at Monroe, those organizations would like to work with us so that we do a big event. I've had some conversations with folks at Core and Black Thistle, and they would like to combine to a larger program that's combined. So last year they did their event. I believe it was 4:30 to, or maybe it was 4 to 6 p.m. And then we did ours I think it was 5 to 7 p.m. So there was an hour overlap with our resource fair. But then the two memorial events, I believe that was the time. I'd have to look at our flyers that we handed out. So we had staggered last year to make sure that we didn't have overlap, or folks could go to both events if they would like to. But this year there is a desire to do a combined event, so that all the providers and sheltering organizations and folks can be at one place. And you know, we want to make sure that it's accessible for members of the unhoused population, is a big conversation. So I think that yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with some of those pieces. And Anne, I saw your hand raised. You're muted. I don't know if you've.
I just wanted to say, being the food server there, I was struck by how few unhoused people we were serving. There were many people who were supporters and of course our speakers and everything, but I fed very few people. I mean, I remember at the end of it that, you know, there were several fellows on bicycles who took away great amounts of food to the downtown section to feed the folks there. So just wanted to support that idea that that site didn't actually attract a lot of unhoused people.
Yeah. So we could look at finding, seeing if there's another location. Maybe the Monroe Park location is better. So yeah, Richard, I see your hand. Jackie, I see your hand.
Well, I was just going to say we're not getting the word out that we're even doing this as well as we should. And I should be doing this on KPW radio as far as both PSA and at the end of my program Newsday. So I will definitely make that a point to do that as we get near in December. I will make that part of my dialogue every Newsday, and then I will also try and do a PSA about it on KPW. But we need to get the word out, otherwise, that we're doing this.
Jackie?
I agree with, sorry, my kids are making dinner right now. I agree with Richard. I think having advertisement, maybe even reaching out to like the Register Guard or Eugene Weekly to let them know that we have it and it can get on an events calendar. And I agree. I think partnering with the other providers who are hosting an event and making it a larger event and earlier in the day could potentially have an impact also. I know the point is it's like the longest day of the year and it's really, really cold, but it's really cold. The longer it goes at night. And I think that less people are likely to come out and even look at resources or stay for the event because of that. And so making sure that we're also aware that people are trying to seek warmth at the same time.
Yeah. Jolene?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, right? I don't know if we've identified our key stakeholders, you know, like, are we doing this for city officials? Are we doing this for the surrounding community? You know, and it could be all, you know, or none. These are not mutually exclusive categories. But whenever I think about downtown and unhoused people, I think about all the different ways that the city of Eugene has put limitations on unhoused people to be able to access downtown, you know, for, you know, over the last few years. There's a smoking ban, the dog ban, you know, the bus things, you know, the security, and you know, there's concerns, you know, as well. I'm not pretending that this is a black and white issue, but as far as like getting more engagement from unhoused folks, I don't, the hard part is that how many have an events calendar that they're looking at too. You know, you think about taking the bus, getting there on time. What does that involve? Because I know that they're mourning every day with fentanyl and the amount of overdoses that are happening in our community. It's like the longest night virtually every day of the year for people right now, you know. So but if we want to truly make this more accessible for people who are on the streets and who are impacted, we have to look at this through the lens of what is it like to be an unhoused person in Eugene. what does it feel like to go to downtown Eugene at 7:30 at night or at 6 o'clock at night or at 5 o'clock, as the evening hours approach, to participate in an event like this, and like Jackie said, potentially risk losing your shelter bed or things like that. So yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. So I think when we look at this, I think there's a couple ways. So if we want to look at an alternative location, I want folks that are proposing that to identify them. So Monroe Park is one on the list. If you want to think through other locations, that might also be an option. Send those over to me by the end of this week so that we can look at permits in those places, and that I could coordinate with some of the outreach providers that would be interested. Um, and I think we've had reservations about hosting it downtown the past 3 years because of those pieces. So if we can identify somewhere to host it that we think is more accessible, I think that'd be fabulous. And then for the marketing piece, so we've done NPR, PSAs, we've asked folks to promote, we've done posts in the Eugene Weekly, handed out flyers. This year, I think part of the goal of having a larger event would be that street outreach providers could hand out doing street outreach. And then I plan on engaging the Eugene Shelter Consortium to hand out flyers within all their shelter programs, so that we get, we're accessing both unsheltered and sheltered folks. And then hoping that, word spreads. And yeah, I think that that's some of like the marketing techniques that we've used. We've had pretty high turnout. And I think that if we can kind of combine, I think that we'll be able to access a larger group of folks. And so just doing that targeted marketing like towards places where folks are living, and making sure that word's getting out on the street. I know that there's a zine that they put out. It's called Word on the Street, literally, that they've talked about marketing in. Um, so we can connect with everyone to make sure that more flyers and things like that go out this year. As far as time of day, I think that 4 to 6 p.m. Worked pretty well for them. So last year there was some concern that that time was going to overlap with people's work schedules, and starting the program at 5 would mean that there would be a lot of people, that wouldn't, even from this work group, that wouldn't be able to make it or help set up because it would interfere with their work day. So that volunteer component, if we shift it earlier, we just have to have a group of folks that's there and able to set up, just so that we can make sure it's accessible for everyone. And one of the things that we could do, especially if we're worried about shelter beds and people having to check in, is we could reach out to the organizations that have mandatory check-ins and see if they'd be willing to waive the check-in for folks if they want to go. That's a question we could ask for some of those walk-in shelters where check-ins are required. And then if we do catering like we did last year, that helps with if anyone's missing dinner being served at service station or shelter project, so it doesn't impact that. So I think those are some of the considerations that I know we've made, and I think things that we could do. So if we want to shift it earlier, if we know that folks can get off work and come help set up, I think I'd be comfortable with that. I could certainly do a 4 p.m. And we could talk to the outreach providers that are interested in partnering too. Jillian, I see your hand.
Yeah, and I'd like to acknowledge that, so if we can figure out how to parcel this down into actionable steps and do little shifts, like maybe call the Eugene Mission, see what the likelihood is of them providing like a shuttle service, for a number of attendees. I know they have a bus, but it's very much exploratory. Like, what does this take? So I would like to acknowledge that piece. I yield.
Yeah, I think I plan on running a shuttle from the communities that I work with. And I think that there might be potential for Vinnie's. I know has shuttle in capacity. I don't know if they'd be able to dedicate the resources to that. But I could certainly talk to them about using that if that's something they want to do. I'm sure their program managers would be enthusiastic about that. I'm not sure about folks that are in other shelter projects. And I think that some of our outreach organizations were giving people rides last year to the Menlo Park event, from my recollection. So yeah, I think that we could get really creative. I know there were a lot of folks that were interested in being engaged last year. So we've got the date. The date is set. Are folks on this committee interested? What aspects would you all be most interested in? Folks that are interested in, like, hey, I want to show up and help set up. Hey, I would like to table, like to be involved in marketing. Just kind of around the room, what are folks most interested in, if anything? And I don't know whose hand went up first. I think y'all came at the same time. Anyone gets to go.
Blake, I'll help wherever you need me. And if someone else would like to ring the bell this year, I'd like to open it up for someone else to do it. And we need a bigger, louder bell.
Okay. The search for a louder bell. Okay. Jolene, Julianne, anyone order
I can,
popcorn?
when it starts, help set up, and then
Oh, Julie, I don't know if.
What?
Sorry, I think we had some feedback. I just muted yours. I couldn't hear you, Julie.
Oh, you can hear me?
No, I'm sorry.
Okay, I can come to help set up early.
Okay.
During the event, I'll be schmoozing with the grannies, so that I need to let them know so they can practice.
Okay. Yeah, so if we look at a setup time, I think we could do that. Yeah, and I definitely want the grannies to be a part. It was so wonderful. So that'd be great. Okay. Anne?
I would like to help set up again, and then I still have my food servers license thing, so I would offer to
Cool.
serve the food too.
Great. Okay, that's wonderful. And Julie, I saw your hand go back up. Okay. Jolene, did your hand go up?
I think my hand was up, but then I took it back down. Not sure quite what's going on there. I'd like to put a pin on it just to kind of see what my capacity is. I will have capacity for this year's event. I don't know if there's reach out with my organization, but we can talk offline about that as well, just to get the materials to the right people.
Great. Okay, that's awesome. And then Richard?
Well, of course, like I said, I'll help develop PSAs and advertise this event on KAPW Newsday at the least, and I'm sure Julie can do the same on legalized survival subsequently. So we will get the word out as we go along on the KAPW network. Otherwise, if I can show up, then I'll help with setup and all of that good stuff. But that's to be determined if I can show up. So we'll see, depending on the location.
Okay. And Richard, I know last year you spoke at the event. Would that be something that's interesting to you again?
I could definitely try and do that again. Yes, I definitely could. But I think somebody like us from the Barefoot Defenders might be a better choice if we're scrapped for time as far as speakers. But I definitely can try and do my part.
Okay. So I think I'll talk with folks, some other organizers that are interested, and see what their thoughts are. I think it sounded like they're pretty open to the planning pieces. So if we're looking for a little earlier in the day, are we thinking like 4 p.m., like a 4 to 6 p.m. event? Feels more comfortable than the 5 to 7?
I don't think it matters on the coldest day of the year. But,
Okay.
If it's more convenient, then people can feel free to speak up. I'm a volunteer and I'm tired one day and then I'm retired the next day. So
I like that. That was witty.
So yeah, I have some free time, but it's consumed a lot. So and that's all I got.
Okay, great. Jolene?
I don't think like a decision would need to be made right now per se. I think like it would be a good idea to kind of do some reach out with, Black Thistle or other outreach
Mhm.
organizations to kind of get some more qualitative data around how does this work, for the demographics that you're working with. And then maybe in 2 weeks or so, put the question out to the group again, and then we can, I guess, cast our initial vote and then maybe discuss it at the next meeting.
So we'll have to have the decision made before the next work group meeting if we're going to start marketing it.
Okay, so it does have to be made sooner.
Mhm. Yeah,
Okay.
so I think how we did this last year is like if folks are interested in different sections, so kind of how you all said, oh, marketing or tabling or that, then I can reach out as long as we're doing like administrative work, and we can do that off the record, like and not in this public meeting format. But as far as that, I'll probably have to reach out and have a decision so that we can put the permit request in by the end of this week at a location.
Okay.
And because it takes some time to process, and then it'll be a pretty quick turnaround.
Yeah, it's amazing how fast the months fly by. It's already November.
Mhm.
So if the location has to be picked or the permit has to be submitted for by the end of this week, does the location have to be decided today versus downtown versus Monroe Park?
No, just ideas. Just really, I
Okay.
just want to know like earlier start time, and then if anyone has any ideas on location. Monroe Park's just the other, that's where the other event was held last year, and it wasn't
Yeah.
downtown, so that's just why it's top of mind. But if there's like somewhere else where like, hey, what about this little, you know, chunk? I kind of wish MLK Park over in like in West Eugene, is under construction. I actually think that would be a really great neighborhood. Um, but if there are other like little areas that might be a good spot to host something like that, it'd be great to know and just to send along.
Sometime we should disrupt the status quo and do this at Valley River or Gateway. Just a thought.
Yeah, there's a nice amphitheater over there. Jackie and Julian, I see both your hands.
I was just gonna say, if you want to connect with the other organizations and see what time works best for them, I'm flexible either way. But just as good stewards working with them in partnership this year, whatever frame they provide, I think we should accommodate. So if it's earlier, it's earlier. If they want it pushed back a little bit, we push it back a little bit, but I'm flexible. And I have our marketing material from last year saved that we can template. So you can connect with me for marketing.
Cool. Great. Okay. Well, knowing y'all are flexible to an earlier start time is awesome. And then I can talk to them about location. And then, really it'll just be about picking those pieces out and getting the word out. But we've got a pretty good runner program, set up. And so once we get the location and date, we can start inviting folks for the resource fair and getting folks, either outreach providers or sheltering organizations, up to speed. I'll make sure that the information gets shared at the Shelter Consortium meeting for the City of Eugene, and see if I can connect with folks at the Lane County meeting later this month. And then, yeah, there's all kinds of meetings. So I'll just make sure that it gets out in November once we pick those. So, okay. Any other thoughts or ideas on the event? Cool. Okay. Well, we'll try to get something rolling, and see who's interested in volunteering, and I'll have some email communication with y'all. And if you think of any alternative locations that would work, just let me know. And then I'll connect with folks at the outreach organizations and see if they've got anything in mind too. And if anyone has like organizational connections, or that topic of transportation comes up, just let me know if there's a way for us to, shuttle folks. And like I said, I think I'm going to be doing some shuttling. Maybe we can see if Vinny's wants to do the Egan shuttle from some of their shelter projects. But if anything like that comes up, just connect with me. I'll reach out. We'll get a good event planned. It's a really, really meaningful evening. So, okay, y'all. Well, that's the last thing I had on our agenda this evening. So if anyone has any ideas or anything, just shoot me a note, and I'll try to get some of the event planning rolling.
A lot, Blake. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for us and for taking on so much with this project. It is meaningful.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really emotional evening for me. There's going to be some really hard names this year. So, all right, y'all. Well, I appreciate you. Thanks for being here on election night, and for all the wonderful dialogue around this. So I will see you next month, and I'll shoot some emails out to folks around areas of interest that you expressed, and we'll see what we can get planned.
Okay,
So,
happy
thank you.
Thanksgiving.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, see y'all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. Thanks, Jillian. See you, Ann.